Hello world. As much as I like to find the more creative adventure games that dare to stand out and do something different and innovative, it's good to go back to basics every once in a while and play a straightforward point-and-click adventure game. Made in Adventure Game Studio, obviously, those games are kind of what AGS is made for. Today's subject is Metaphobia, released on Steam by Digital Mosaic Games in February 2020 for Windows only. Although I suppose it doesn't matter too much where you get the game from because it's completely free. Unless the place you get it from tries to charge you money, of course, in which case, no, it's free, don't let them do that. We'll go straight into the story, and it begins like this. You're Richard, an artist. Your dad is Edward, a politician. He's also dead. You suspect foul play and return to the life you once left to start investigating. And the first thing that happens after the intro is that your daughter shows up for a visit, who you leave to sit in your apartment while you go investigate a murder. Seriously, all I remember is her being annoyed at her dad, expanding a little on his past, then she's out of the story. Not entirely sure why she's there in the first place. So, aside from the main thrust of the plot, we've also established that Richard rebelled against his family lineage of politics and at some point in the past had a falling out with basically everyone and or ran away from that life entirely. The first thing on your to-do list is to ask your ex for help, so this story point remains front and centre for a while. And by front and centre, I mean that people are sometimes grumpy for 5 seconds, then help Richard anyway. It might be sympathy though, he did just lose his dad after all. Although I can't imagine the scars of "my boyfriend actually ran away from his life" being smoothed over that quickly. I realise this is all sounding a little negative to start off with, so I'll wrap up my thoughts on the story real quick so we can move on. Despite building itself up as a perfectly good conspiratorial whodunit, there's a point where the plot shifts from that detective story and into territory that some academics might refer to as completely off its nut. Certainly something that's rather easy to roll your eyes at depending on how many conspiracy theories you keep up with. Taken as a piece of fiction, however, I think it's a perfectly valid place for the story to go and it fits the tone of the game okay. I've certainly seen worse swerves in my time, cough Fahrenheit cough. It's also a bit of a downer overall. That's less of a criticism and more of a warning if you're planning to play this yourself. As well you might, it's free after all. Now, I mentioned the phrase back to basics earlier, and hopefully that wasn't taken to be a criticism because I meant it quite literally. That simplicity can be a nice change of pace for your average adventure gamer. Back to a straightforward game where you use items, talk to characters, solve puzzles and experience a story without trying to explain or evaluate the merits of extraneous game features. Okay, that last one is pretty specific to me, I realise, my bad. Point is, that's the game you're getting here. Right click to examine, left click to do, inventory button in the top left. If you want something to call the classic gameplay experience of point and click games, this is it. At least if you're not getting 9 verb grids or verb cycling involved. Given that this is an Adventure Game Studio game, some of the default shortcuts from that engine will also work, such as number shortcuts for dialogue choices and pressing the period key to skip lines of dialogue. Thankfully, they disabled the press F9 to restart shortcut, which I'm convinced no living human has ever pressed on purpose. With this basic approach, however, there's a danger of the game getting a little samey. The fancy character animations, of which there's quite a few unique ones, aren't really utilised in cutscenes. Those tend to end up being long periods of two people talking, and one instance of someone reading a diary and essentially delivering a massive monologue with nothing for the player to look at but the subtitles. It can be a bit of a slog at times, is what I'm saying. There is just a sprinkling of extravagance, granted. 1 or 2 items will make a pop-up image appear when you examine them, and they might be interactive in themselves. You can also double-click to warp through exits. Sometimes. Not sure why that's so inconsistent, honestly. And with those controls, you'll be solving puzzles, which are mostly in the traditional adventure game style, objects and dialogue. These mostly make sense and give a reasonable number of aha moments where your brain gets the good chemicals for doing a solve. 1 or 2 puzzles will veer over into moon logic territory, maybe one of them tips right over the edge. Plus, there's one puzzle early on where the next step is outright stated. You have to make a disguise, but you can only put it on in full view of the person it's meant to fool. Outside of the usual designs, I found myself really liking the glyph puzzle that the developers made here. You have a small Sumerian alphabet of glyphs, a range of glyph buttons to press, and a phrase in English to translate. And I only say a phrase in English because I tried clicking the language arrows in the settings menu and they did nothing, so I'm kind of forced to assume at that point. Anyway, you'll need to translate that phrase into Sumerian, but some of these words require multiple glyphs to write out, and some English words are a combination of multiple Sumerian words. As a puzzle, it's got some meat to it, more than enough for it to make repeat appearances throughout the game. From the mere act of matching symbols to figuring out the combination of Sumerian words that would equal an English one. I really like this puzzle design, at least in theory. For one, back to basics also means a low-res art style, and it can be a little tricky to work out which glyph on paper translates to which glyph on button, as they're not quite rendered the same way. Second, the puzzle is a little unforgiving. Any mistake and you seemingly have to leave and come back to try again. If only for the first instance of this puzzle, I'd suggest adopting the Obra Dinn approach. Every 3 solutions you input correctly get locked in, and you can continue trying from there. I still like it as a puzzle. Matching words and glyphs is fun, and trying to find the right mix of glyphs for a word engaged my brain very nicely. But it's a little bit punishing. By the last time this puzzle shows up, we're talking about tens of button presses, and you don't get so much as a, "oh well, that didn't work" voice line if you get to the end having made one mistake. A little unforgiving, but still a nice concept. Which is as good a time as any to talk positives. This is a 3-hour long, or something like that, adventure game with smooth rotoscoped animation that isn't so focused on showing every detail that it slows the whole game down. There's a full and engaging story, interesting puzzles, it's fully voice acted, it can build the right atmosphere when it needs to. Some of these tracks give me Silent Hill vibes, and that's not a statement I make lightly. To top it all off, as I may have mentioned a couple dozen times, it's completely free to everyone who has a Steam account. That's not something I can just dismiss based on some parts of the game I didn't like. It's probably enough for me to handwave some of the smaller issues entirely. Actually, that sounds more like I'm advocating for the game's right to exist more than I am trying to recommend it. Of course it has the right to exist, that's what the internet lets you do. As for why the game is free, this is likely another case of a developer putting out one game for free in the hopes of drumming up interest in their next title, and indeed Digital Mosaic Games have something else in the works already. Considering that they're willing to not bother charging for something this well put together, I'll be keeping an eye on what they do next. So, should you play this? Well, do you want to play a classic style adventure game? A mystery where the plot goes to some strange places? Do you like spending no money? Well, it's not flawless, but you can do a lot worse than putting your time into this. There's a reason why I refer to this game with phrases like traditional, or classic, or back to basics. It's a stark reminder of how adventure games used to be. How you don't necessarily need a bunch of bells and whistles to tell a story, even just as a reminder of how far the genre has come. And granted, this would be more of a throwback to the later period of the point-and-click golden age. The rest of you can wait for the Crimson Diamond to come out. But nevertheless, it's exemplary of a time gone by. Now, innovations are great to see, and I'll keep trying to seek out games with those innovations in them. Still, a bit of simplicity is sometimes just as worthwhile. And if you're subscribed to this channel, you'll find out when I get round to playing those innovative new point-and-click games. There's also like and dislike buttons and comment section. Feel free to use those, let me know what you feel about the episode. If you really like what I do here and can afford it, I do have a Patreon you can pledge to. With any luck, the names of those people will be scrolling by right now. But in any case, thank you very much for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you again soon.